Hi Year 10 and welcome back to your distance learning lessons. Today we are going to have a look at something a little bit different. We are hoping to use today's lesson to provide you with some really good feedback on some of the learning that you've done so far. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to look at an exam question or a typical exam question. And actually we're going to focus on the 6-mark exam question because these are typically the exam questions that most people struggle to pick up the marks on. And you'll have seen some of these in class when we're at school, and typically they are the ones that people struggle on, and we take the opportunity to tell you exactly how you can gain the 6 marks. So what we're going to do today is we are going to look at an example 6-mark exam question, and I'm going to go through the question, kind of break down what it is that you need to look at in order to answer it, and then I'm going to walk you through my thoughts so that we can answer the question, and then you're going to look at the question as a whole and take some examples from it and some advice from it before you answer your own 6-mark exam question. The 6-mark exam question that you'll be answering at the end of the video, I am going to provide some success criteria for. You can find them in the folder on the OneDrive for you to access. I'm also going to provide some scaffolding in the form of sentence starters and things like that if you need them. And this piece of work should be emailed back to your classroom teacher, so whoever it is that teaches you physics, you need to send your answers back to by July 1st, okay? So anytime on or before July 1st, send your classroom physics teacher the exam question back. They can have a look through it, and we will do a feedback lesson in the last week of term so that you know exactly how to gain 6 marks on these types of answers. So just to signal again, this question here is not the exam question that you have to answer. I'm not looking for you to just copy the answer that I give down. I'm looking for you to watch how I go about answering this question. What tips and tricks can you pick up that will help you answer the question that I will actually give you at the end of the video? Okay, so let's have a look at the question. It says that ultrasound and X-rays are waves that are used in hospitals to create images of inside of the human body. It produces pictures or images like below, and in order to do that, the waves must enter the human body. So that's just a bit of background information and a picture. The question says, describe the features of ultrasound and X-rays and what happens to each type of wave after it has entered the human body, and it's worth 6 marks. So first of all, before we even look and try and dismantle each part of the question, I'm just going to notice that it's a 6 marker. Therefore I know that I'm expected to have a long answer or a long-ish answer. Use full sentences, and at least try to keep on top of grammar and spelling. Okay, now the question itself hasn't mentioned anything about grammar and spelling. It's often worth 1 mark anyway. Okay, so we're going to keep that in mind as we try and answer this question. Then I'm going to have a look at the question itself and try and dissect exactly what the question is trying to show me. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to look at these 2 waves that are being talked about. X-rays, okay, I know that they are part of the EM spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. I know that they are quite high in frequency and therefore also high in energy. Ultrasound, we actually haven't specifically looked at ultrasound together, so I wouldn't really expect you to know too much about them. It could be that you started to have a look at ultrasound and sound waves before we entered lockdown, so your classroom teacher, you might have a little bit of a niggle of a memory there. But ultrasound, and again, you don't really need to know this because your exam question is going to focus on this. I mean, at some point you will have to know what ultrasound is. But this is just being used for example purposes. Okay, so ultrasound, it's a sound wave, and it's a very high frequency sound wave. Okay, so there is me straight away just kind of trying to distinguish between those 2 waves. The next word that I'm going to pick up on, because it's really important, is this one. Most 6-mark exam questions will have either describe or explain in the title. They're quite different or to one another, quite subtly different though. So it's really important that you have a clear idea of exactly what it means when we say describe or explain. Now, because we've used a describe, that normally means that we have to go into some detail about these things, okay? So we're going to go into detail about each of the waves. And what that really means is we are talking about the types of wave that we have and properties of those waves. Okay, so this is kind of the first couple of lessons that you'll have explored, looking at waves, their types, their properties, etc., that you're going to have to detail in answer to this question. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give myself a little bit of a kind of success criteria or chart that I can tick things off as I'm doing when I go through the question. So it says describe the features of the ultrasound and x-rays and what happens to each type of wave after it has entered the body. Okay, so I'm just going to put x-ray and ultrasound. And then up here, features, and then inside the body. And this has just given me a nice little tick list where I can check off as I answer the question, have I talked about the features of the x-ray, have I talked about what's happened inside the body when I'm talking about x-rays, and so on and so forth for ultrasound as well. And then that way I know that I'm well on my way to getting the 6 marks, okay, because I've broken that down into smaller parts so that I know exactly what I need to do. Right, let's have a go at trying to answer this question then. Okay, so I'm going to start off with x-rays just because I've put them first in my little box, and I'm going to say x-rays are electromagnetic waves that have very high frequency and therefore energy, or high energy rather, and a short wavelength. Okay, then I also know that x-rays are ionizing, so they could potentially cause damage inside of our bodies, but for medical imaging, which is what this question is talking about, we're talking about low or small doses of x-rays so that the ionizing capability of the rays are kept to a minimum. Okay, so obviously we don't want to hurt people by using x-rays, so they are not as exposed to them for as long or have larger gaps between being exposed to x-rays. So I'm just going to quickly summarise that. I'm going to say something like x-rays are ionizing and in excessive amounts are capable of mutating genes or cells, but in controlled quantities can be used for medical imaging. They can be safely used. Okay, so there is my x-ray features described. I can tick that off in my box. now I can move on to what happens when they're inside the body. Okay, so I'm going to say something like X-rays can travel easily through skin and soft tissue. But are absorbed by bones, which shows up as white on our images. Okay, so now I've described what happens once they're in the body. Okay, passes through skin and soft tissue, which is why that is dark on our X-ray image, but it's absorbed by the bones, which is why they appear white. Therefore, we can use them really easily to see what is happening to bones and when fractures occur on bones. Okay, so there's my X-ray portion done. And I probably would have picked up 1 mark for talking about the feature of wavelength, the features of X-rays, the fact that they've got high frequency and high energy, and then I'd have picked up another mark on them being easily passed through the skin and soft tissue, but being absorbed by bones. Okay, so I'm halfway there for my 6 mark question. Next, I'm going to start talking about ultrasound. Okay, so I'm going to start a new paragraph just because it makes a little bit sense for my question, showing that I'm using some good English skills so that I can write on a contrasting wave. Okay, so ultrasound is a longitudinal, and don't worry if you've not met that word yet in class, when we come back to school you will go back through these different types of waves. Okay, some of you will have seen of this wave or heard of this wave. Others of you might not have. For now, again, it's just part of my example, so don't worry too much about that if you don't understand what that means. So a longitudinal sound wave with a frequency well above human hearing. It's actually got a frequency of about 20,000 hertz. So that's my features of ultrasound done. Okay, really simple. It's a sound wave, it's longitudinal, it's got a really high frequency, and it's above the human hearing range. Okay, all condensed into one nice sentence. Probably 2 marks worth of stuff there. Now we need to talk about what happens once it's inside the body. It's a little bit more complicated, but not that bad. Okay, so ultrasound is partially reflected at the boundary between 2 different media. Okay, so inside the body, for example, here's our picture of a fetus inside the womb. Ultrasound is passed through the stomach, and it's reflected off some parts of soft tissue, but then some of it will keep on going, and then it might meet a liquid and get reflected again, and then it obviously is meeting another form of soft tissue, in which case it is absorbed, that kind of thing. So depending on basically the frequency of that particular ultrasound wave, it's either completely reflected or absorbed, but it normally happens when it's passing from one type of medium, so for example skin or tissue, into another type of medium. For example, this is the amniotic fluid, okay, so a liquid, and then it'll be absorbed or reflected back. So we can say something like ultrasound wave travels at different speeds through different media. Okay, and then I will stop and I'll quickly read back my question and make sure that I've done everything that I wanted to. So with this last sentence here, I can confidently tick that inside of the body part of my ultrasound box. So X-rays, EM waves, high frequency, high energy, short wavelength, good, features done. Then I've said that they can travel easily through skin and soft tissue but are absorbed by bone, so bone show up as white on an image, yes, done. Okay, so that's my inside the body bit ticked. Ultrasound, on the other hand, it's a sound wave, it's longitudinal, it's got high frequency, the frequency is above human hearing, features ticked off, and inside the body, ultrasound gets partially reflected at the boundary between different media, and in those media, the ultrasound wave can travel at different speeds. Okay, cool, yep, inside the body is ticked off as well for ultrasound. So I know and I can feel reasonably confident that I've done everything that the question has asked me to do. I've given it a longish answer, full sentences, I've used grammar, I've used I've checked my spelling to make sure things are done correctly. I've got new paragraph starters, I've got commas in there and things like that. I've got my little success criteria so that I can check and make sure that I've done the correct thing or what I think the question has done. And I've not gone into any explanation. I've literally just stuck to details that are talking about types of waves and their properties so that I can tick that describe box as well. Okay, so that's my example question. That's my waggle for the example question. Now we're going to have a look at your actual exam question. This is the one that you need to answer and email back to your classroom teachers by July 1st. So, the exam question that you have to focus on now at home and complete for your classroom teachers is the following. It says that the chart below shows the regions of the electromagnetic or EM spectrum. We've got radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, visible light, ultraviolet waves, X-rays and gamma rays. The question asks or states, describe in terms of their properties why they are all members of this spectrum and explain why they are arranged in the order shown. And it's a 6-mark question. And you can see that what I've done for you to help you answer this question at home is I've put in your little success criteria, but instead of having a little table underneath the question, I've just detailed it on the left hand side of the screen of the question here. Okay, so you can see that you need to identify properties of all EM waves, identify differences in wavelengths, and identify differences in frequency. If you follow that success criteria, tick it off when you think you've completed it in your answer, and then email your answer to your classroom teacher by July 1st, then you'll be well on your way to getting the full 6 marks in this question.